Hi VC, I mentioned a while ago that I was going to do a video about my buying trip up to Manchester. Taken me a while to get round to it, but here it is. Yeah, I was up in Manchester just after New Year and visited a couple of shops up there. One of which I'm very familiar with, I always visit when I go up there, which is Kingbee Records in Chorlton, which I can thoroughly recommend. Prices are great, stock changes regularly, and they have some really interesting stuff. Always some really good prog and psych up there, and some good bargains as well. And the other one I've not been to before. I'll come to that in a minute, but first I'll show you 5 of the highlights from my stash I got from Kingbee. And I'll start off with one that I've been after for a long time. There's no chance I was ever going to get an original of this. Even if I could find one, I wouldn't be able to afford it. So I've settled for an A Karma reissue of Dr. Z's 3 Parts to My Soul. Like I say, this is an A Karma reissue, came out in 2003. The original album was on the Vertigo Spiral label and came out in 1971. Paid 20 quid for this. Very happy with it. And typically for A Karma, even though they're a little bit dubious, the sort of legitimacy of the label, they do a very good job of packaging stuff. So you get the original gimmick sleeve as you would have done with the original Vertigo issue. And there's the Karma label. Yeah, so this is a 3-piece band, bass, vocals and keyboards. No guitar on here at all. And it doesn't get a huge amount of love generally in reviews. It's one of those weird albums that's highly sought after because of its rarity, but very few people have anything good to say about it. I think because it's not as prog as people want it to be. I don't know. But I like it. So vocals on here, they're characterful rather than really excellent, I suppose you'd say. Remind me a bit of Arthur Brown in places. In others, the vocals on Comus's First Utterance album and Bill Fay a little bit. So I enjoy them. I have no problem with character over excellence, if you know what I mean. And some of the backing vocals on here are kind of whispered, so give a real kind of creepy feel to some of the songs. Reminds me in a way of the first Manfred Mann Chapter 3 album, which plays a similar trick and has those whispered backing vocals which give a real haunting feel to some of the tracks. The drumming on here is kind of tribal. It's very jazzy, and it's not technical, I suppose. Again, that's something that separates it from a normal prog, I suppose. It's not a Bill Bruford or Phil Collins type drummer on here. Probably more in common with jazz than with prog, I suppose, and big band jazz more than anything. The track Spiritus Manus et Umbra features a drum solo, which is straight out of the kind of Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, big band swing book, I suppose. Love it. Drum solos don't always do it for me, but don't seem to get bored with this one. It's really quite interesting, and it seems very in keeping with the rest of the album. It doesn't seem jarring being there. Tons of piano on here. Like I say, there's no guitars. There's piano. There's a lot of harpsichord as well, which is really nice. And it's nice that it's piano and harpsichord rather than Hammond organ. Love the Hammond organ, but I'm glad we haven't just got another sort of vanilla fudge sort of sludge fest on here. There's flute as well, which is a nice touch. And the whole thing has a slightly sort of, I don't know, an organic, immediate feel to it. Like I say, it doesn't get a lot of love, this album, but I enjoy its sloppy, atmospheric, sort of almost occult, weird vibe. So yeah, Dr. Z or Dr. Z and 3 Parts to My Soul. 20 quid well spent. Then next up, an album by a band. Again, I've been looking for something by them, and this cropped up at a very good price. Like I say, Kingbee don't overcharge for the records. Got Martin Circus's Act 2 album for just £8. And it's a double album, so that is a huge bargain. Condition is sort of VG plus, plays through really nicely, even though there's some marks on it. This came out in 1971. This is an original pressing on the Disque Vogue label. I'll show you that label now. French label for a French band. And yeah, they formed in 1969, this lot, and this album came out in 1971. A lot of diverse instrumentation on here. You've got sax and flute and viola and accordion and trombone, as well as the usual kind of organ, guitar and drums and bass guitar. Stylistically, it's kind of all over the place, but if I had to pin it down a bit, I'd say there's Zappa influences in there, Caravan, Soft Machine, Secret Oyster, and generally overall there's a bit of a sort of Canterbury scene vibe to the thing. They were a very theatrical band. I mean, I don't know how clearly you can see the pictures there, but they were fond of a costume, and the gatefold sleeve demonstrates as much, both on stage and off. I think they were an influence on bands that came along a bit later, like Ange, another French band. I'm sure they would have been very interesting to see live. The vocalist has a real rasp to his voice. Tons of bubbling Hammond organ on here. Great bass playing. And yeah, thoroughly recommended. Highlights for me so far, I think, and there's a lot to dig into because it's a double album, but the track J'ai Perdu has some really nice funky wah-wah guitar on it. And the first track, I think it is, Buchatilak. Don't know whether that's how you pronounce it. There's a real spooky sort of ethereal start to it. And then it gets this fantastic kind of hypnotic bass line and sax and jazzy drums coming in. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I shall be exploring this more thoroughly, but Martin Circus, definitely recommended. I think they became more commercial sounding as they went on, but this album, I imagine the first, which I haven't heard, well worth tracking down. Then here's one I've been after for a while. I didn't rush out and buy it when it came out new because I thought I'd pick it up eventually, and so I did. It's Iggy Pop's Free album from 2019, and I paid £10 for this. Looked like it'd been unplayed, still in the shrink. This isn't highly rated by some people, but I love it. It's poetic, it's jazzy, it's dark. There's spoken word elements. It's got a nocturnal feel. It's atmospheric, it's chilled, it's filmic, it's intimate. It's not Iggy and the Stooges raw power. That's what it's not. And perhaps that's why I've read some bad reviews of this. Some people can't accept that Iggy's growing old and maturing, but he's not growing old and mellowing. This is a chilled album, but it's not throwaway at all. Highlights on here for me, third track, Sonali. It's got trumpets on here which give it a trippy, muted, drifting quality, which I love. It's a real late night album, this is. Dirty Sanchez is kind of like Iggy Pop's take on that kind of Calexico Tex-Mex sound. Love that one. And We Are the People is a spoken word track with a kind of plaintive piano, muted trumpet backing. And that brings to mind, not necessarily it sounds exactly like it, but it's just the same kind of idea, I guess, as Harry Dean Stanton's spoken word on the Ry Cooder Paris, Texas soundtrack. So this is a proper grown-up album by Iggy Pop. I love it. It's challenging, it's jazzy, it's dark, it's film noir, it's brilliant. I love it. And next up is a track, an album rather, by Ronnie Montrose, which came out in 2017 and he died in 2012. But this is an album he was working on before he died, and he'd got together with Ricky Phillips, who played in The Babies and Bad English, I think. and with Eric Singer, the drummer from Kiss and previously with Alice Cooper. And it's a project where I think Ronnie came up with the title 10 by 10. He went 10 songs with 10 different singers on. And as it happened, he ended up with 10 songs with 10 different singers and 10 different guitarists as well, because Ronnie laid down all the rhythm tracks and the riffs before he died, but the lead solos weren't recorded. So, Ricky Phillips and Eric Singer took it upon themselves to finish the album off for him with Ronnie's widow's blessing. Brought in a load of guitarists to do the leads, a load of singers for each of the tracks, and it's a who's who of rock royalty on here. You've got people like Steve Lukather, Dave Meniketti from Y&T, Tommy Shaw, Joe Bonamassa, Brad Whitford from Aerosmith, and then on vocals, Glenn Hughes, Eric Martin from Mr. Big, Greg Rowley, Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad. And it's a really good listen. It doesn't sound like one of those cobbled together after the fact albums. It sounds like a proper release and flows really nicely considering there's different vocalists on every song. Highlights on here for me: the bluesy swagger of Love is an Art, which has Edgar Winter on vocals. There's a moody, brooding hard rocker called Colourblind, which Sammy Hagar sings, and that is a fantastic performance. Great song, love it. But perhaps for me the highlight is second from the last track, Head On Straight, where he gets Davey Patterson on vocals. And Davey Patterson was the vocalist in Ronnie's 80s group Gamma. Always loved Davey Patterson's voice, and he puts in an amazing performance on here. Sounds like classic Gamma, or even like an updated version of Robin Trower or something like that. So yeah, I paid 10 quid for this. Very happy to have done so. Really solid hard rock album. Then the last one I bought at Kingbee, it's a bit of a punt, or that wasn't that much of a punt because it was in the bargain bin. At Kingbee there are boxes of cheap records underneath the main racks, and the prices are kind of low. This was no exception. It cost me £2 for a promo copy of the Ghost Orchestra's self-titled album. And this was released on CD. It never got a proper release on vinyl. You can only find promo copies. Came out in 2004. And this was £2 well spent. It's hard to pin down the sound of this one. It's kind of lo-fi and cinematic. The vocals are mainly female vocals, and they're clean and clear. But there are 2 songs with male vocals, including one called Ruby on the Moor, which has strings and cello and a very mournful vocal. And that has a kind of chilled Cocteau Twins sort of vibe to it. There's a ton of piano accompaniment to these songs, some guitar, light orchestration in places, which always sounds appropriate. Can get a little bit dark in places, but only a little. I suppose it sounds at times like a more organic Portishead, perhaps, particularly on the track Twins, or a bit like a less spiky PJ Harvey, I guess. And occasionally the female vocals can get a bit more strident. They can take on a sort of almost a Shirley Bassey quality on tracks like Acumen. So yeah, this was a good find. I'm very happy to have got this. £2 was nothing to spend on this, and yeah, I can thoroughly recommend it. You might struggle to find a copy out and about, but I think you can get a copy on Discogs very cheap. So the Ghost Orchestra. So then on to my second record shop, and this was one I'd not been to before. It was just down the road in Stockport, a place called SK1 Records, which I guess is the postcode for Stockport. SK1 makes sense. I say not been there before. Very welcoming little shop, great selection of stock. Prices were good, staff were friendly. There was a listening deck, so I could listen to stuff before buying it, which I always like doing. And that's some really interesting stuff. First off, I got this one, Father Yod and the Spirit of 76. And this originally came out in 1974. This is a 2005 reissue. I paid 20 quid for this. Again, very happy to do that. I never considered 20 quid for a quality album to be overpaying. And Father Yod was a leader of a cult or a commune in California in the 70s. And they happened to have a recording studio within their commune and recorded somewhere between 65 and 70 albums or albums worth of material. I'm not sure they released that many albums. Some of them were under the name Father Yod, some were under the name Yahowah. And they are interesting artifacts of a sort of bygone era, I suppose, that kind of whole California cult thing that's happening in the 1970s. Yod is the kind of self-proclaimed leader of the cult. He has no musical talent at all. His singing ability is questionable. And he delivers a kind of almost a sermon or a sort of his dogma over the top of a psychedelic acid jamming background. His voice is somewhere between Captain Beefheart with a Messiah complex and Jim Morrison if his poetic abilities kind of abandoned him. But don't let that put you off. Some people hate this guy's voice and think it destroys what would otherwise be a really good acid jam. But I think it's got a lot of character, got a lot going for it. And this is supposed to be one of their better albums. So I just lucked out because I just grabbed it because it's the one I saw. But it's a really good album in their back catalogue, I believe. Yeah, it is an acquired taste, but these have been reissued, so there's obviously a demand for them. I imagine the originals are pretty scarce. I think the cult sold them locally, had their own label and sold them locally just to kind of raise money for the commune. But there's enough interest in them through books like the Acid Archives and things like that you can find reissues. And I should be looking out for some more of them because this is really interesting stuff. And, there were numerous people in this cult. So you get 12, 13, I think 12 people. I think he had almost like he had a Jesus complex. He had 12 disciples almost singing with him on this album, singing, playing guitar, doing whatever. And I think they all took the surname Aquarian. It's almost like a Jesus cult Ramones. They all had to have the same surname. So yeah, interesting stuff. Interesting backstory. Then I picked up an album I've been after for a long time. Again, was never going to find an original. So this is Fuzzy Duck's self-titled album. Came out in 1971 originally. This is a 2020 reissue on Be With Records. The original was on Mam Records. Paid £20 for this. Fantastic condition. Absolutely no complaints there. I mean, they were a UK band. Their sound, I guess, is a bit like a less dark Atomic Rooster with elements of May Blitz, Leaf Hound, Jerusalem, all those bluesy, heavy psych, hard rock albums of the 70s, really. Things that makes this stand out is the songwriting is very, very strong. Musicianship is fantastic as well. But there are no throwaway tracks. There's no dodgy covers. It sounds like they were well rehearsed and probably gigged these tracks until they knew them like the back of their hand before they went in the studio, rather than doing what a lot of these bands did and writing half the album in the studio and coming up with some pretty lame, 12-bar boogie stuff. The opening track, Time Will Be Your Doctor, seemed very familiar when I heard it, and now I realised I had heard it before because it's also on Tucky Buzzard's debut album, which also came out in 1971. But Paul Francis, the drummer on this album, was also the drummer in Tucky Buzzard and in The End, the Psych band produced by Bill Wyman. So I guess he had every right to re-record that song, and I guess it was a re-recording because Tucky Buzzard's album came out 3 months before this one in 71. But there's not a lot between the two versions. This is fantastic, so check that out. Other tracks of note, and they're all of note. It's a really good album through and through. But Mrs. Prout, is Hammond Organ Heaven, if that's your thing. And Afternoon Out has some amazing organ and wah-wah guitar interplay. So listen to the album, listen to the whole thing. There's not a bad song on here. Musicianship's great, songwriting's great. Then this was a good find. It was Collegian Musicum's live album, and this was a band out of Bratislava, Slovakia. So this obviously came out during the sort of time of the Eastern Bloc and the Iron Curtain and all the rest of it. And musicianship on this is fantastic. It's came out in 1973. This is a slightly later reissue, but still a Eastern European reissue on the Opus label. Get that out for you. And what does it sound like? I suppose it sounds like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, but without the naff novelty tracks that ruined most Emerson, Lake and Palmer albums. There are no vocals on this, which for some people might be a relief, because I know some people are averse to hearing foreign accents on their records, but I would like a few vocals on here because it starts to sound a little bit samey without vocals. I mean, musicianship is exemplary. It's fantastic, and it is all bass guitar, organ interplay, and jazzy drumming. No guitar on here, I don't think. Can't remember hearing any guitar. And there are numerous highlights. There's a track C Nemojna, the second or two, has a doomy feel to it. I mean, they've all got that organ, drum, bass thing going on, very Emerson, Lake and Palmer, but that has a doomy feel. And Monumento has a really interesting bass intro and heavy bass throughout, and that is a bit of a highlight. Like I say, no vocals, can get a bit samey, but it is a really great listen, gotta say. Then next up, this is now I've been after for quite some time, ever since I saw it. There's a copy of Shindig magazine a few years back where they were doing an article on Beatleisms, basically bands, albums that sounded like the Beatles. And I've been working my way through buying most of those. One that eluded me was We All Together, and I finally have a copy. Not an original. Came out in 1972. This is a 1997 reissue, but it came out only in Peru because they are a Peruvian band. I was never going to get an original. I wasn't going to wait around for one, even if I could get one. They started off as a psychedelic band called Lagonia, who I've never heard. I'll have to check them out. But there's nothing really psychedelic about this album, apart from a little backwards guitar here and there. What this is just Beatles love through and through, particularly latter-day Beatles, kind of the White Album, Abbey Road, that kind of thing. And Paul McCartney, and Wings especially. In fact, there are 2 Wings covers on here, as well as 2 covers of Badfinger songs. If you didn't know the songs, you wouldn't know they were covers because they blend so seamlessly to the band's own material. They're very convincingly English sounding. There's no hint of an accent in the vocals. You would swear this is an English Beatlesque band. This is quite a find. I love this album, I really do. Every track is a highlight, but if I have to pick a couple, Young People has a soporific Emmett Rhodes feel to it, this kind of piano and acoustic guitar, and a guitar solo that sounds very much like George Harrison. And It's a Sin to Go Away. That has the sort of aforementioned backwards guitar on it and a really dreamy vocal, so it's beautiful. So for fans of Wings, early solo McCartney, Emmett Rhodes, Badfinger, latter-day Beatles, this is one you need to check out. Great album. And then my final purchase in SK1 was by a band whose records I saw when I was in Berlin last year and didn't pick up because I made the mistake of reading a few online reviews which were pretty much uniformly slating this band, which I don't get because I've really been enjoying Street Mark and their album Dry, with its very difficult to show foil cover. I paid £7 for this. Very, very happy with it. Came out in 1979, so it's quite late for what it is, which is symphonic prog with a bit of a spacey krautrock feel to it as well. I suppose has similarities to some of Eloy's symphonic prog, quite commercial in places, but also full-on prog in others. There are male and female vocals on here. The woman's voice is probably the stronger of the two, but in combination they work really well. Some great tracks on here. Sunny Queen, the last track on side 1, has lyrical lead guitar, some nice bubbling synths, there's organ on there, and it's kind of reminiscent of some neo-prog from the early 80s, bands like IQ and Palace. So yeah, that is worth checking out. First track on side 2, Lovers, has a zipping synth solo, and it's really a beautiful melancholic song. Then Drifting has a kind of folky meandering feel to it until it kind of picks up pace as the song goes on. And the track that probably has alienated more listeners than any other on this album, I imagine, is Disco Dry, which is disco prog, which sounds like a horrible concept, but I quite like it. There's a quite full-on timbales solo on here, which is like a drum, a percussion instrument, mostly used on kind of Latin music, but the drummer really goes for it on his timbales, and that coupled with the sort of disco beat is quite something. It is prog, it is disco, and it is really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't sleep on this I'm not going to sleep on it if I see any more of their albums, but for £7 I'm very, very happy to have that. So yeah, SK1 was a really good place to visit. I don't know how quickly the stock turns over. I'll find out next time I go, I suppose. But that's recommended. If you've got any comments about other record shops worth visiting in the Manchester area, or anything to say about SK1 or Kingbee, let me hear it, or got anything to say about any of these albums. I'll be back again reasonably soon, no doubt, and take care. See you again.